This is Gary Lux, and you're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to The Business Side of Music.
This is Bob Bender. You're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music. Today we have in the studio with us, or should I say over the phone with us, from Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, Cris Cohen, who's owner of Bands for Fans. They're a content marketing company for businesses, bands, individual musicians. A little bit of Chris's history: interned at KLSX Radio in Los Angeles, assisted engineering such legendary DJs as Jim Ladd and Dusty Street. And you were also on the air at KCQR Radio in Santa Barbara, California, which for many of us here in Southern California, Santa Barbara is kind of God's country for us. Also wrote a humor column that ran in a few small California newspapers, did some album reviews. But since starting this company, you've done some content marketing for Huey Lewis and the News, Fabulous Thunderbirds, Rich Redmond, who I actually got to know back in 2008 when we were on the road together during the Jason Aldean CMT tour, Taylor Dayne, Big Head Todd and the Monsters, and Mark Broussard, just to name a few. I love the one quote I came across here was, as I was doing my research, because of the internet, every band in business is now a media company. Your media company needs a professional writer, editor, interviewer, and biographer, which leads us to Cris Cohen. Cris, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So I got to ask you, how did you start this? What was the concept? What was the mindset of getting this going?
I guess you would classify me as an accidental entrepreneur. I didn't have any grand scheme. I just kind of saw an opportunity and thought I would give it a try. To give you the condensed version of it, I've always been a music junkie. And, it's funny, people I meet like yourself or Rich, all these other musicians, the fun thing about meeting them is finding out they're genuine music junkies too. And so I, always had this love of it all. And as you said, got to do radio and that kind of thing, and then then eventually segued out because radio was going through some tough times. And I've always had a geeky side to me. And so I ended up working in the tech world and thought I was just going to be Mr. Corporate Guy, but then I kept going through layoffs and downsizing. And there was one time I was in between tech jobs, done some work with a local publication out here in North Carolina, and they said, by the way, we have a connection to one of the local amphitheaters. If you, want to ever do something, let us know. So this is in 2011, I believe it was. Huey Lewis and the News were coming through, and I said, I'd love to go to that show. And they said, cool, would you write a review? And I said, sure. But then I thought about it, and I was like, an interview would be much more fun to do than a review.
Right.
So I contacted their management and started talking and pitching it. And as I was doing the research, I started looking on social media and online, and I found they really weren't doing that much. They only had about 7,000 followers or something like that on Facebook. They weren't on Twitter at all. And so I started talking to the management and saying, I think you guys are missing out on an opportunity. They obviously have many more followers around the world. And there's a lot of stuff, that's interesting about them that, you guys just aren't addressing. And they were kind of, just curious but cautious. So a few days before the show, I did a phone interview with Huey. And at the end, I just said, what the hell? And I pitched myself for doing social media. And he said, well, I like what you're saying. Let's talk about this more on Saturday. I said, great. How? And he said, well, you're coming to the show, right? And I said, yeah, well, I have tickets. I don't have backstage passes. And he said, well, now you do. So during the opening act, I met with him, Bill Gibson, the drummer, who had been doing some of their social media stuff, and Lowell, their manager. And, essentially I gave him the pitch and said, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff about you, your history and your music that's not getting out there. And, you could connect with a lot more people. There's, I think you have way more fans than are actually currently following you on Facebook. I said, you're not on Twitter at all. I said, there are 3 fake Huey Lewis accounts on Twitter. I said, at least I assume you guys weren't the ones who set up the account with the handle, I'm Huey Lewis, bitch. To which Huey, To which Huey replied, "I don't know. I may have said that at one point in time."
Let's hope not, but sure.
Yeah. So I talked to him about it, and they said, "All right, we're going to think about this." So I went back out to the main area, watched the show, came backstage after the show, and Huey said, "I think we're going to give this a try." And so a few weeks after that, management called and said, "All right, let's give this a shot." It was 2011 and around August or so. And they said, let's try it till the end of the year and see how it goes. And it's been 6.5, almost 7 years, and still working with them. And that's how I kind of fell into it.
One of the things I came across in doing my research and how our listeners can find out how I discovered you was actually on Facebook. We saw one of your sponsored pages pop up and clicked on it and started liking what I was seeing. But one of your quotes on your page, I think you actually put it on there yesterday, in fact, said, "A lot of people think the world of online content is about making a big splash. But to me, that's like starting a marathon with a full twisting flip and thinking you're done. The move is cute, but you still have another 26 miles to cover." I think what you described there is, jumping in and expecting immediate results is nice, and it's good fantasy to have, but it's not reality. And I think Huey Lewis is the perfect example of that. Is here's a band that started out, I think, in Northern California, in the Bay Area, and just kept plugging along. And this is one of the reasons that their career has lasted as long as it has, is because it's a marathon. They've run this as a marathon, but things have changed. Back in those days, the record label supported you. You went out and you did radio tours. They shipped the songs to radio, and you said something that was profound, which is the radio business has changed. The dynamics, the platforms. We talk about this a lot on the podcast. Radio is not what it used to be. It's a lot different, and you have to find new media to get your message out there. Assuming that's what Bands to Fans is.
Yeah, and you're right. It is. I mean, that's the thing is so many people nowadays get caught up in the myth of overnight success. And you're right. Huey Lewis and the News, great example, especially because they didn't really hit big time until they were older. Well, at least for rock musician standards. They weren't teenagers when they first hit, so they had been doing it for quite a while. But as a result, they had really honed their chops and were great performers already by the time their name made it. And but there's so many people out there that think it's still, with all the social media and everything, that they think it is an overnight success. I was listening to your show with, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he runs Showstoppers, I think is the business.
Right, Steve Pennington.
Yeah, and he does a lot of work with, these various television shows and stuff, who have discovered, some fantastic talent. But I would argue, number one, a lot of the talent they discovered were people who had been, again, honing their chops for a while, so that when they did make it, they were prepared. And then also on the flip side of that, people think, oh, you just go on this television show and then, you've got it made. But, I always tell people, it's like, well, I'm convinced some of those television shows are connected to the witness protection program, because most of those people you never hear from ever again.
It's interesting you bring that up, because Steve and I, since that podcast, he and I have communicated on a regular basis. One of the things I love about what Steve does is he starts working with these singers, these vocalists, starts with them at a very young age. And it's interesting you say that, because that has been a conundrum of sorts for him, because parents will bring their children to him. Steve will work with them, really help develop them, and then they want to move on and go somewhere else, whether it's to Nashville or Los Angeles or New York, thinking that, okay, Steve, for example, has set the groundwork, and now we can move on and our son or our daughter can be successful overnight. And Steve just has shared that with me more than once, and I can hear the frustration in him sometimes, that it's a long race, folks. It's not going to happen overnight. So
yeah, and I've had similar experiences with young artists who have come to me via managers, via parents and stuff, and I tell them, look, this is going to be a long haul. This is not an overnight thing. And then they're like, oh, we get that. We understand it. But then after 2 months, they don't understand why they're not the next Taylor Swift or whoever your pop star of choice is. And, the people that get it are just, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And it's the persistence and the patience that comes with it all.
It is. And when we come back, I want to talk about that a little more. And then I want to jump into one of your quotes because we're in a very timely area with what's going on, especially with Facebook these days. But we can touch on that when we come back. This is Bob Bender. We're in the studio today with Cris Cohen from Bands for Fans. And you're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Hi, this is Vinny Rebus, the founder of Indie Connect. Our goal is to ensure that you have the knowledge, the tools, skills, resources, and connections that you need to develop a profitable and long-lasting career in music. One way we do this is through these Business Side of Music podcasts. I'd also like to invite you to check out Indie Connect magazine, our free multimedia online publication packed with practical interviews and advice from music industry experts. Go to www.indieconnectmag.com. That's www.indieconnectmag.com. Let us walk with you and guide you every step of your musical journey.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
This is Bob Bender. You're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music. In the studio with us today, Cris Cohen, owner of Bands to Fans. Wanted to make sure I got that right. Content marketing for businesses, bands, and individual musicians. We've been talking about that this is a marathon race. It's not an overnight success type thing. One of the things that I always question to myself and to others is, what do you focus on? What is the important thing what is the most important thing for, say, a musician or an artist? And you posted something also where you said for a long time it's been trendy for content creators to complain about Facebook and the limitations it places on their reach and of course the monetization opportunities. Obviously, the same thing goes on with Pandora, with Spotify, with YouTube, all these different platforms. And of course, as we touched earlier, the business has changed. The business model as we used to know it has changed dramatically. You don't really necessarily make money off of album sales, at least not as much as you used to. It is streaming and downloads, although the organic movement of records and CDs is starting to come back. But especially with what's going on with Facebook right now, Mark Zuckerberg's just spent a couple days in front of Congress testifying because potentially very private information has been released. And if you read some of the posts on Facebook from your Facebook friends, I had one who's also in the industry, very well respected, who posted today, he said, I'm pretty much done with Facebook. If they're releasing this type of information, I'll go somewhere else. Here's my question. Where else do you go? What else do you do?
First off, I think, the key is not to give up on having your own property, your own website. I know it's not as cool as it once was. Everyone's like, oh, I don't go to websites, I just go to social media. But you still want something that's yours, that you own and control, so that if whatever social media you're putting your time into disappears, you still have all of your content and there's still a place where your fans can go to connect with you. The biggest example being Vine, which was a social media site specializing in, I think it was 6-second videos, which there were some people that built up big names using that particular platform, and then overnight they announced, well, we're going to shut down, and it was all gone. So first off, my thing is, don't expect to control anything in particular. And I've always been kind of platform agnostic. Whatever works, whatever comes along, we can make it work. If you have good content, also, I'll say this, it'll travel. People will share it. The first time I went on Pinterest just to look around, I saw content that I had put together with the client's cowboy mouth, and we had never been on Pinterest, but fans had taken the stuff we had created for Facebook and reposted it on Pinterest because they liked it. And again, you want content that will work anywhere as far as that goes. You're right. There are people that are really angry with Facebook, although I don't understand the people who actually come out and say, that's it, I'm done with Facebook, I'm just going to stick with Instagram from now on. Apparently these are people who don't realize Facebook owns Instagram and all the information is shared there. And I don't know that you can ever really fully get away from that kind of thing, but it's just know that you're not in control of that situation, but I still think it's a fantastic opportunity to connect with people. Every social media platform you deal with, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, whatever it is, they have algorithms that control what people see, how many people see your content. And so, there's only so much you can do to control that. As long as you're putting out good material, it's still amazing how well you can connect with people.
But you just said the two key words, good material. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what it comes down to, because, we used to say in the studio when I was producing, garbage in, garbage out. And it's still clearly evident to this day. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean if someone doesn't like your style of music, your genre, or maybe your message within the music, that it's junk. It just, you're not reaching that demographic in that capacity. But you do have to create something, I believe at least, that is engaging to that audience. And how I look at it is I use the acronym AID, AID, and that is turning that awareness. You create something that becomes an awareness and turning that awareness into interest, because you really want to get past that 7-second mark of interest. And then you want to turn that interest into demand, because ultimately that's what it comes down to. You want to create a demand for yourself, for your product. That's what makes this financially successful for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way of putting it. And, that's always been my frustration, and is that, I'm a music fan. I'm a music junkie. I think I've read the liner notes on every album I've ever owned. I've always loved this stuff, and so it always killed me when I got on social media and saw these great bands, and they were just posting pictures of their lunch. And no one was talking about, their music. It's when pre-internet, when I was in radio and that kind of thing, I used to, scour magazines and newspapers for information and interviews with these bands that I loved. And then the internet came along and social media came along, and everyone had their own channel, their own broadcasting ability. And I thought, great, now I can just tune into this and get it directly. And I still find myself scouring magazines and newspapers for information because bands just were not putting up anything about their music or how they put their music together. And there are so many fantastic stories about, and that's really what I work with my clients on. Let's I know we're going to, tell people about the shows and push the new album, but let's let them get to know you and how you create your music and the inspiration for the songs and why you chose this instrument and how you came up with this chord progression and all of that material.
You brought up something I think that's so extremely valuable, which is what you just said. Fans getting to know you. I have said to my clients on so many occasions, take a photo shoot as an example. When you go out and you do a photo shoot, don't do it in one setting. Don't do it with one set of wardrobe. Have various changes of elements and atmospheres, different changes of wardrobe, because a couple things are going to happen here. First of all, you're introducing yourself to the fans. Maybe it's your current audience and it's growing. You have new fans coming along, but they're going to stay with you. I'm like you. When I was a kid growing up in junior high and high school, I couldn't wait to get the album and read the liner notes. To me, that was just as interesting as listening to the music. I'd want to know who was playing on the album or where the band was from. But the other thing was, yes, I would get the magazines out. I would look for articles on, let's say, Chicago back in the day. I started listening to them when they were Chicago Transit Authority. I would always look for pictures of them because it's that moment of intimacy, of being able to see them in different dynamics, different platforms, different types of situations. That's how your fan base can, at least one instance where your fan base can grow with you, because now you're becoming more engaging to them and it allows them to become engaging to you. But to do something that is just completely one-dimensional is just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that is a good point. And that's the vibe with a lot of websites and social media. If it's done well, it does feel like you're talking to someone one-on-one and making that connection. You know, along those lines, it's funny because social media has all these stats and numbers. To me, for the most part, a lot of that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't really tell you how well you're connecting. What I find interesting, one of the clients I work with is a musician out of New Orleans named John Papagro. And like one thing he said was after we started working together, and he has some really great insights on working in the New Orleans music scene and stuff, and we've been putting that out. And what he said was interesting. He said once we started doing that, people would come up to him after the show and ask him about things that was posted on social media. These weren't people that necessarily commented on social media or, you know, that have reached out to him in any other way, and maybe his numbers weren't going through the roof, but suddenly there was obvious evidence that people were reading and looking at what he was putting out.
Touching along those lines, I think Rich Redmond is a perfect example. I met Rich back in 2008. We were on the CMT country music tour together. It was Rich Redmond and Lady Antebellum and Eric Durance, and I was tour managing one of the bands and got to know Rich pretty well, and have followed his career over the years. And of course now, in addition to him still playing drums with Jason Aldean, he's going into some different directions. He has this crash course with Rich Redmond. I'm not saying he's necessarily reinvented himself, although that might be, you know, some quotes you can put around it, but he's definitely created a whole new atmosphere and a whole new audience for him. And how I'm finding this out is on different platforms, and it's keeping him engaged with people. But what I also like about it is his communication skills, because he's not only posting things, but then he's communicating back with you.
Yeah, and he's really fabulous with that, and it really reflects who he is in person. As you know, he's this really affable, approachable guy. And I think, you know, that's the cool thing is, you know, back in the day, you had to be a real music junkie to find out, you know, to really know who, let's say, Kenny Aronoff was. And there was no way to really get to know him much beyond whatever you read in the liner notes or something like that, or Modern Drummer. But now with guys like Rich, who I would put on that level, you know, you get to know him as a person, and he's developed this speaking career, because he does fabulous corporate talks where he brings his drum kit, so it's not like death by PowerPoint kind of thing. He's diversified and exploring all these different opportunities, and he's taking everyone along for the ride.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. He's creating a wonderful ride for us to all follow with. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to pick your brain on where you think the next new platform is going to be for businesses and musicians and artists. This is Bob Bender. We're in the studio with Cris Cohen. He's the owner of Bands to Fans, and you're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music. Next up, the Indie Artist Spotlight, brought to you by Reverb Nation.
Hi, this is Spencer.
And Sequoia.
And we are Spencer and Sequoia. We are two singer-songwriters that collaborate and harmonize to achieve a chill, jazzy pop sound that you can hear on our latest single, Best Thing, available on Reverb Nation.
The stars are looking like the moon sprinkled through the sky, and the sky itself, it looks pretty fine, and the clouds are full, even though it's still night time. The birds are singing, make the sounds look pretty, and I see reflects this big city, and the lights made by men will never outshine your best thing that's ever happened to me. Come to my heart, you know everything, and I want to know all about you. Ooh, no, you're everything that I'll ever need, even when life gets so frivolously complicated. They say they'll never see the wind, but leaves dance. Oh, they spin with that wind. So can't you see it? See it? They say that they'll never see you, but they'll always look outside their windows, not a picture painted by the fingers of a man, 'cause it can never stand for you. Oh, you know you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Come to my heart, you know everything, and I want to know all about you. Oh, no. Oh, no, you're everything that I'll ever need, even when life gets so frivolously complicated. Oh,
We are Spencer and Sequoia, and we're members of Reverb Nation.
You're listening to the business side of music.
This is Bob Bender. We're in the studio with Cris Cohen, owner of Bands to Fans. We've been talking about engaging with the audience, getting the musicians or, businesses, because you also work outside of the music world. Where do you think, in your insight, in your mind, where do you think the next trend's going to be? And let me preface that by saying, one of the record labels I used to work for, my boss would say to me, well, Facebook is going to be around for about another 5 or 6 years, and then the next new thing's going to come along. Well, that was probably 10, 12 years ago that he said that. Is there a next new thing coming? And if there is, what do you think it is, or what do you think it'll be?
I don't know. I don't know that I've ever been great at predicting what the next new thing is.
Well, let's face it. If we all had that crystal ball, we'd all be in a lot better place than we are now.
Right. And I don't know. In some ways, I guess I wouldn't count any of the current big players out. I know things could change overnight, but it reminds me actually when I was working in radio, and this was in the early 90s, and the Rolling Stones had just signed a multi-year deal with Virgin Records. And I remember one of the guys that worked at the station saying, well, that's dumb because, how much longer are they going to be around? And, well, needless to say, he was proven really wrong. So, some of these entities, I don't think you can count out, and especially the fact that they keep buying up, smaller entities. So I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure where things are headed, but I guess it all comes down to, you can communicate via pictures, video, audio, and text, and everything is some version of that, amalgamation of that. And so mainly if you focus on getting good with communicating in those ways, you'll be able to adapt to whatever comes along.
So we shouldn't give up on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. Is one better than the other? Do they all accomplish the same thing? Should we focus on all of them or just one or two of them?
I guess.
And we're ignoring Twitter. I mean, Twitter's out there too.
Right.
Is that as viable as the others?
I think it is. I think it's still good. There's all these rankings about who has the most attention right now and who's in the lead, but I don't know if you, I guess find whatever platform you're comfortable communicating on. Really go all in on that. I don't think there's any real bad choices. I think, well, the bad choice is to be frantic about it and to constantly keep running from one platform to the next and constantly abandon things or worry.
Which is probably just as bad as doing nothing.
Yeah, I think so. And because there have been people that are like, oh, well, this is dead. I'm leaving this and I'm moving on to the next new hot thing. And if you still have people who are reading your stuff, engaging with your material, then I don't think it's any reason to abandon whatever that platform is. I don't know. I guess I just wouldn't worry about the ratings or, the way people rank these things.
I think television is a perfect example of that. They'll take a great show off the air because the ratings are low, and then somebody like maybe Hulu or Netflix will pick it up, and it sparks new life into the series. I think and we do the same thing in the music business. I've said this many times, we'll look for the hat act. We don't necessarily look for the hat that fits the act. We look for the act that fits the hat. And as soon as they don't fit the hat, we get rid of them.
Right.
So, we have to be careful. And I think it leads back to what we talked about when we first started the show is this is a marathon. It's not a sprint race. We're not trying to get somewhere overnight. Because, as quickly as you go up, you can come down just as quick, if not faster.
Yeah, definitely. Back in when we were young, the one of the marks was, did you get on the cover of Rolling Stone?
Right.
There have been a lot of bands that did get on the cover of Rolling Stone that just really kind of disappeared because they didn't necessarily have that stamina. And I think this is another area where people get lost in the numbers and the stats that social media has. Well, first off, you can fake those numbers. You can buy followers or fake followers and inflate those artificially. I think it was a month ago or so, the New York Times had this really great investigation into all that where they showed these particular celebrities that had 1 million followers on Twitter. But then when they investigated, it turned out only 160,000 of those were real people. Similarly, I know of artists on Facebook that have millions of followers, number-wise, but can't sell a ticket to save their lives. Whereas, like a band I work with, Cowboy Mouth, they have about 70,000 followers, but they will sell out a 1,000-seat arena. And that's because, they have the stamina and they put on a great live show.
Let me ask you this. A client comes to you. What can you offer them? The
best stuff that I do, there's all these gimmicks and stuff with all right, what's the trending hashtag and that kind of thing. But that's ephemeral. It comes and goes. The heart of my work is what I do is I will sit down and interview the clients and get into a conversation, much like this one, much like you do with your podcast. And through these conversations, draw out a lot of great material. If you ask someone to just sit down and write out a post, people get stuck and have writer's block. But when you get into these conversations, it's amazing the kind of places it can go and memories it can trigger. And so what I do is I, converse with them and draw this out of them and then record those conversations and transcribe it and use that to pull out their best material. And that's, I think, becomes the foundation of what their content is. I'm not putting words in their mouth. It's still them. It's still their personality. It's just they've got a lot more insight and stories and fascinating facts tucked away in their minds than they probably know.
One of the things you said one of the things I read is one of your quotes where you talk about because of the internet, every band and business is also a media company. It really does come down to that. You have to think about, okay, you are this. And so that media company needs that professional writer, that editor, that interviewer, and the biographer. And that's you.
Yeah, exactly. And I also make an argument that it's good if you have that, under your wing, let's say before you get hooked up with a label, that, take that upon yourself to be that professional. Number one, you can't necessarily count on the big label deal to come through. And, number two, it's good to have, your own team.
And we've talked about that in the past, where a publicist is important.
Yeah.
Sometimes a publicist is more important than an agent or a manager, because that person, especially if they're good at their job, will get the word out there, will get the press out there ahead of the game for you. And once again, whether it's online, if it's a digital format or it's a physical magazine, press is good, print is good. You're getting your word out there, and you're starting to make impressions.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I think that's really valuable. And the clients that I work with, they also work with publicists who focus more on traditional media and getting them pieces in newspapers, magazines, and television.
So, Cris, how can people reach you?
The website is bandstofans.com, bandstofans.com. That's the easiest, and then from there you can, go on to Twitter and Facebook and find my pages and channels there. But the website is the hub for where everything starts.
Cris, thanks for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
If you're interested in learning more about our show, drop us a line at musicpodcast@mail.com. That's musicpodcast@mail.com. If you have any suggestions of persons or topics that involve some facet of the music industry that you'd like to hear about on our podcast, please feel free to let us know. You can follow us on Facebook on the Business Side of Music podcast page. You can also find us on Twitter at Music Business Podcast. Also, if you're listening to this podcast on iTunes, post a review on what you think of our show. This is Bob Bender, and you've been listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender for Bob Bender Productions. Co-producer for the show is Vinny Rivas. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Los Angeles, California and Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound designed by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.